start. If you are not a member of the Technology Networking Group and would like to join, please visit the website provided on this slide or contact one of the co-chairs for the Technology Networking Group, Tracy Wallace or Rachel Profit. Here are their email addresses. Thank you for being here again. My name is Shatanuka Bhattacharya, and I am a co-chair of the Communications Task Force within the ACRM's Technology Networking Group. Our speaker today is Dr. David Putrino, and he'll be speaking today on innovative health technology adoption in hospitals, how to engineer change within your own institution. Before we get started with the presentation, I do want to advise that this meeting is being recorded. I'd like to ask all attendees to keep your phones or mics muted and keep your cameras turned off throughout the presentation. We do expect to have about 10 to 15 minutes available for discussion at the end of the webinar. So if you have questions, please type them in the chat feature, and we will address as many of those as we can during the latter part of the hour. And with that, it is my pleasure to introduce our guest speaker, Dr. David Putrino. Dr. Putrino is a physical therapist with a PhD in neuroscience. He worked as a clinician in Australia before moving to the United States to study computational neuroscience at Harvard Medical School, MIT, and NYU. He has served as a faculty member at Weill Cornell Medicine and Burke Medical Research Institute. He is currently the Director of Rehabilitation Innovation for the Mount Sinai Health System and an Associate Professor of Rehabilitation and Human Performance at the Icahn School of Medicine at Mount Sinai. He develops innovative solutions for individuals in need of better healthcare accessibility. He works with the Red Bull High Performance, the Brooklyn Nets, and the US Olympic team to use evidence-based technologies to improve athletic performance. He's the author of Hacking Health: How to Make Money and Save Lives in the Health Tech World. In 2019, he was named Global Australian of the Year for his contributions to healthcare. Dr. Putrino, we look forward to your talk, and I will now turn over the presentation over to you. Thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much for having me. So I'm just going to go and share my screen here. Thank you so much for having me and for the very kind introduction. Hopefully the screen sharing is going okay. So I work at Mount Sinai, and what I do currently is I manage around 3 different clinical and research centers at Mount Sinai. And these centers are focused on integrating novel health technology into clinical practice. So today I'm going to give a rundown of my process and the process that we work on at the Abilities Research Center and some of our other centers. But I figured it might be nice to just give a bit of an intro to how I got interested in this field and my level of expertise in this area. First and foremost, nothing to disclose for purposes of this presentation, no conflicts of interest. Starting off, and so just one quick question: can everybody see my full screen, or is the screen being cut off?
It's cut off a little on the side.
Okay, let's see if we can make that any better. Has that?
Yes, this is
there we go.
Screen.
Well, that was weird. I don't know why that happened, but here we are. We're back. So as was mentioned, I started out life as a physical therapist working in neuro rehab, and I was within a few years of working clinically, I was very dissatisfied with the level of evidence in what we were doing. So I worked with two phenomenal scientists, Frank Mastalia and Shomo Ghosh, pictured here, to do my PhD at the University of Western Australia, trying to understand the neurobiology of motor control and how it changed with brain injury. Learned a lot from my PhD, but really, as I started to enter into this world of experimental neuroscience, I started to realize that we, as a clinician, I wasn't really trained. I didn't have the tools or the vocabulary to sort of ask the questions that I wanted to ask. So I was really fortunate to have the offer to come out to Harvard and MIT and work with this gentleman, Emery Brown, who's an absolute genius and amazing innovator in the field of computational neuroscience. He's Emery himself is a full professor of statistics at MIT, full professor of medicine at Harvard, chair of anesthesiology at Mass General Hospital, classic underachiever. And working with Emery was amazing because I got to see firsthand how an individual can integrate all of these worlds, to be multilingual, to sort of be able to speak statistics to the statisticians and medicine to the doctors, and switch between languages for the health technology innovators. So I really learned a lot from Emery. But my time in Boston was very much working on learning statistical methodologies that using existing data sets. After a couple of years working with Emery, the experimenter in me was getting itchy again. I wanted to run experiments, moved to New York, accepted a position in a lab where we were working on brain-machine interfaces and brain-machine interface technology at NYU. And I think that this is where I had my first because this was where I saw the kind of destructive power of a pure tech, pure science approach. I was working on a very exciting brain-machine interface project at NYU. It was Department of Defense funded. The project itself was using technology that I thought was very innovative and next level. But it was very impractical, millions of dollars of tech. It required pretty invasive surgery. And then it required a lot of computational horsepower, a room full of computers to get the brain-machine interface to do what we wanted it to do. And the thing that is sort of indelibly imprinted in my mind was when we hit our final deliverable on this brain-machine interface project, my PI at NYU sort of danced into the room and said, "We've just cured paralysis." This is a human being that has never actually met an individual with a high-level spinal cord injury or severe stroke, someone that would need the brain-machine interface that we were developing, claiming that we had cured paralysis. The team was very excited. The team was aligned. This is great. This is what we've done. And me, the only clinician in the group, was horrified because I was really starting to see this disconnect between the traditional science world, the incremental science world, the Department of Defense funded, NIH funded, let's make small incremental increases in knowledge, and what the clinical world needed, which was, massive patient-oriented change. Interestingly, I think serendipitously, while I was sort of mulling over my horror at what was happening in the lab, I went to a conference and I got to hear this amazing clinical chaplain speak. And on the topic of technology, he said this, which has really stuck with me. I really feel as though he was talking directly to me in a crowd of a few thousand people when he said, "Progress for the sake of progress is the ideology of a cancer cell." And what he really meant here in context was this idea that just throwing technology at a solution without actually taking in all of the human elements is the most inhumane thing that you can do. You know, obviously for me, this was a very formative moment. You know, I came out of that conference, mind completely blown. I immediately quit my job at the lab at NYU and went looking for a faculty position. So basically, as I was on the job market, my thesis was this. You know, if anyone hasn't seen this, this is a really great infographic that was done by an academic called Matt Might, and it's sort of an infographic of a PhD, and it kind of shows how much your PhD contributes to, you know, the breadth of all human knowledge. And I really want to point out that Matt is not trying to dissuade people from doing a PhD with this infographic. He's just trying to put in context what knowledge you gain from a PhD, what knowledge you gain from traditional academia. And, you know, and there is nothing wrong with doing this. I really want to stress, I don't hate on academia. I don't think that it's a bad model. I'm just saying, when everybody is doing this and no one is being more broad, everyone is looking for very, very blinkers on, isolated, this is my area of expertise, I don't go outside of my area of expertise. But unfortunately, humans and the integration of technology into humanity doesn't work that way at all. You know, you actually need someone to be, again, being multilingual, speaking lots of languages, speaking to patients, speaking to scientists, speaking to clinicians, understanding all of the moving parts that make a technology impactful and successful. And no one was looking at that. No one was even, trying to advocate for the fact that this was needed. We were all stuck to the NIH model of doing things because everyone wants those NIH dollars to, push your rankings up in the hospital, in the medical research institute rankings, US News World reports. No one wants to actually do the stuff that's going to impact people because the NIH doesn't fund that. They don't fund these broad pragmatic projects. They fund incremental knowledge, and to be an incremental specialist, you need to prove that you are the world leading person in X. So this was a big gap to me. And again, this is not saying that the other model is bad. It's just acknowledging that there is a disparity in the number of people focusing on one versus the other. So fast forward a few years of pushing this line, and I ended up in the office of the Dean of Mount Sinai, Dennis Charney, and he said to me this quite jarring sentence: we're the biggest health system in New York City, and if we don't innovate faster, we'll be dead in the next 20 years. What he was conveying to me here is that change is hard for a large, unwieldy health system, but he also acknowledges that, the pace of health technology is starting to catch up, and there are new players in the field. There are, Amazon is going to launch a healthcare platform. Other groups, Walgreens, Walmart, are looking to launch health systems. They're looking to leverage all of these new billing codes that allow us to use technology to make people's health better. And as hospitals and hospital systems and academic research centers, if we don't, perk our ears up and take a look at what's going on, we're going to find ourselves in a lot of trouble very, very soon. So the pace of innovation needs to be fierce. And it always reminds me of this Hemingway quote, because we always think that we're too big to fail. This may not be a Hemingway quote, by the way, disclaimer, there's a bit of contention as to whether he actually wrote this, but it really brings to mind how I think about hospital systems. They have all of these redundancies in place. They get government contracts, so on and so forth. They think we're fine, but they're losing more and more market share to other competitors. And then suddenly it'll all go away. And this is what when I'm advocating for use of technology, when I'm advocating for the need to this is what I try to remind our chief financial officers and our presidents and our CMOs. This is what can happen if we don't keep up with the pace of innovation. So to his eternal credit, Dean Charney said to me at the end of the interview, he basically said, pitch me an idea that makes me uncomfortable and I'll hire you. And so I said, well, here's my idea. I want to run a lab and I don't want to apply for grants at all. I want my lab to be focused on working with companies and making those companies successful. And clearly that was the idea of being a faculty member that never wrote grants was uncomfortable enough that I was hired. And as I was hired, it wasn't a complete, disorganized disaster. I had two main missions, and it was to move the needle on a couple of statistics. The first was from this 2016 article in Forbes, talking about the fact that 98% of healthcare startups, digital health startups, health technology startups, were failing before they touched a patient. If you think about that logically, it is such a horrifying thing to take in, given that in this country, the current value of investment placed on health technology startups is around $300 billion. $300 billion is being invested every single year to make these startups successful. That is 10 times the NIH's annual budget, and 98% of these companies are failing before they touch a patient. They're failing because it takes on average 17 years to get a health technology company from one side of the valley of death to the other. And the reason for this is actually surprisingly not regulatory. It's because hospitals and health systems are not equipped to help companies be successful in a way that is authentic and pragmatic and get stuff done. So these were the two things that I had in mind when I was, working on building out some of the centers that we now have established within Mount Sinai today. This is my chair, Joe Herrera, my co-director of the Abilities Research Center, Dr. Mark Cortez, and myself, casually leaning on a TMS machine because, technology. But this was us starting up the Abilities Research Center in a sub-basement at Mount Sinai Hospital. And one of the things that I think is really important is I can talk as much as you want, but unless you can inspire leadership support within your institution, a lot of your paths of getting buy-in for technology will be very difficult. I am eternally blessed, and I cannot say this enough, that Dr. Herrera is an incredibly strong advocate for what we're doing at the Abilities Research Center and our other clinical centers at Mount Sinai, as is the dean, as is the CEO of the hospital. Leadership support is crucial. You cannot create cultural change without the support of leadership. So I'll stop kissing up to my boss and move on, but I really did want to say that. So we as we opened the Abilities Research Center, we really made this effort that we wanted to have a really broad range of technologies that we worked on. We didn't want to just be pigeonholed to, we're a kind of technology accelerator and we specialize in X. We knew that the need was broader than that, so we wanted to create a broader program than that. So, excuse me. So we work with a number of technologies, and they range from very low tech, a Bluetooth blood pressure cuff that syncs to an app so we can track stroke survivors post-discharge. All the way through to what you're seeing here on the right is a technology called Stentrode. So this is an endovascular stent, which has recording electrodes on it, so it can become a brain-computer interface. This is really leading-edge technology that I'm super excited about, that, you know, I'm proud to say that our lab is conducting first-in-human trials with Stentrode technology, you know, moving forward into this year. And so we have this is to say we have a broad range of technologies that range from minimally invasive and ultra low tech all the way through to somewhat invasive and very, very high tech, first of its kind technology. We work with ultra low cost technology. So one of our projects looks at using virtual reality for managing. And we understand that a lot of people living in chronic pain can't afford fancy and expensive technology. So, you know, we've made this technology incredibly scalable in that it Google Cardboard, which costs about $8 on Amazon, your own smartphone, and we host the content on YouTube. So we work with low-cost technology like that, all the way through to exoskeletal robotics and other technology that is high cost. And we hope that with our support, it will become less high cost over time, you know, looking at Moore's law and things like that. Hopefully, the more we can scale a technology like this, the more that the cost of the technology will come down. God, excuse me. Anyway, moving along. We also work across the lifespan. So our Charles Lazarus Children's Abilities Center, we work with kids at early stages of development. We work with health technology companies that are trying to create solutions that are for kids, as opposed to what typically happens in, which is just using a smaller version of an adult thing to help kids. So we're very passionate about incubating technologies for children, all the way through to older adults toward the end of life, and working with novel technology that can improve quality of life, quality of care, quality of social interaction and participation in older adults. And finally, we work across the performance spectrum. So we work with individuals that have very low potential for performance improvement, but where a small amount of performance improvement can mean the difference between success and failure, all the way through to individuals with a high potential for performance improvement in their current setting, if given the right chance to use technology. What you're seeing over here on the right is an image of the quad guards. This is an adaptive team made up entirely of individuals with quad. And what we have seen in terms of the gains, the incredible gains that they can make in performance, both in esports as well as in life, when given the right technology, is absolutely unbelievable. So we're really passionate about viewing performance as a spectrum and understanding that, you know, the more universally we design environments, the more people are going to continually astound us with what they're capable of, because they were simply just working in a world that wasn't designed for them, as opposed to having low ability, which is sometimes how it is viewed. Now, it was not all roses in building the Abilities Research Center. We, of course, had a lot of detractors. This is a common sentiment that is thrown our way. Again, because traditional research track candidates need to have a core competency that is theirs alone. They need to be the world leading expert in X. And so when they see the Abilities Research Center, they say, oh, okay, so you just, you know, you do other people's science, you know, I don't get it. You know, it's okay, traditional research track person, you don't have to get it. What valuable IP will this generate? This is tech transfer office. Where, you know, how do we get the money? We have a highly acrimonious relationship with members of our tech transfer office, because we say, look, we're here to make other groups valuable. We're here to get good ideas used in the clinical setting. We're not here necessarily to make a ton of money for our lab. Now, if those two goals can be achieved in tandem in an ethical way, great. But if it is if we have to choose between getting a technology that we believe in widely used versus trying to lock the company down in some IP agreement that will ultimately choke them and not allow their technology to be used, we're going to choose rapid dissemination of a good technology 100% of the time. And this is a battle that we constantly have to fight for, making sure that the technology that we are using gets into the hands of the patients that we care about. What's your main question? What's your question? Everyone, as if you can only ever have one question in your entire career. We often get this. So, they see 35, 40 different clinical trials. What's the overall question you're trying to answer? So these are the common things. These are all great questions to ask when you're trying to fund your lab rather than create patient impact. These questions make perfect sense for someone who's more concerned about keeping a lab open or showing value to a tech transfer office than actually helping patients. Like I said, it is not necessarily that you always have to choose one or the other. There is opportunity here for everyone to play well together and for this to be a lucrative process. But first, you need to be mission-oriented, and you need to be authentically mission-oriented, because that's where generating value actually lives. And I think a lot of people miss that. So we started out with great intentions. It was going to be simple. We set up the Abilities Research Center. We act as a proving ground for novel technologies. We run clinical trials. We see how they work well. And then we say to the rest of Mount Sinai Health System, well, this is great. This technology passes our muster. You guys should disseminate this through the entire health system. Simple process, not difficult at all. We were going to be fine. Obviously, we had a bit of a Pinterest versus reality moment of that was not going to be as simple as we first thought. It was going to be a bit of a challenge. So we had to rethink our approach, and we had to break down our approach even further. And I think the first thing we had to do is understand why people don't want to adopt technology. Clinicians have all sorts of reasons why they don't want to adopt technology, and it's important to hear about all of these reasons, because if you can't understand these reasons, then you can't work to combat the reasons. Now, we hear a lot of things. So we hear not enough time to adopt a new tech. We hear not enough funding, so resources are an issue. Sure, get it. Patients don't want it. That is usually not true. But even if it were true, we'd be asking the patients, not the clinicians. So, keep that in mind. I'm afraid it will replace me is a sentiment that is often thrown out there. This may be an unpopular opinion, but if you believe that what you do can be replaced by a machine, you should find a different job. Like medicine should not be able to be replaced by a machine. You should be bringing more value to your job than what a machine brings. And if you're afraid of, AI replacing you as opposed to it being IA, which is intelligence augmented, so rather than taking you over, it should augment your clinical practice, then I'm concerned for you. So that is sometimes a contentious point to bring up, but I really do believe it. I think that we are better than the machines, and we shouldn't be afraid to say it. Not enough evidence everyone wants to just kill startups by pilot. You know, even when startups have enough randomized controlled trials, oh yeah, but you haven't done one here at this institution, so let's do one more just to make sure that your technology actually works. I hate technology, you know, like at least you got to respect the honesty on that, but we shouldn't ignore a statement like that. I'm getting ready to retire. This is also something that I've heard. I place this in the same basket as people who talk about climate change as the next generation's problem. Just because you're getting ready to retire doesn't mean that you can't affect some change within your organization. Bad excuse. So I don't like a lot of these excuses, and I think we can get past them again if we have institutions that are geared toward cultural change. These are culture issues that we need to iron out. I also hear, you know, I just think that behavioral change is hard. I think that this is something that happens a lot, or there's threat. So we're already working on this, but not really. You know, really what you have is one researcher who's incredibly detail-oriented on one area of science, and that's not really working on building out a product or getting technology into the hands of patients. So these are the problems that we face. These are the challenges that we face. And I'm going to spend the rest of our time together just talking about how we've created some pathways that help us to engineer change within our organization. And, you know, but before I do that, the final thing I do want to touch on is just the idea of why all of these reasons aren't good enough. So even if you're sort of thinking, well, I actually happen to agree with all of these clinicians who are saying they're under-resourced, too busy, they don't want the tech, the patients don't want the tech. The reason it is important that we integrate tech, the reason why all of these excuses simply aren't good enough is in very recent memory. When COVID hit New York City, when we were really on our knees, it was technology that pulled us out of it. It was quick thinking, it was innovation. And categorically, I'm sure that it was the case for your health systems as well. It was certainly the case for Mount Sinai. The bureaucrats who always block things, that were saying, let's circle back around, let's take this offline, all of that garbage that you hear as trope all the time. In this situation, circle back around killed people. Let's take this offline, that kills people. Every second you are not implementing a novel technology to help patients in an emergency situation, you are costing lives. And we cannot know when the next crisis like this is around the corner. The evidence would indicate it's once every 10 years we get tested like this. Once every 20 years we get tested extremely. And in these moments, this is when we need to have a plan versus a whole bunch of half-baked ideas that we haven't pushed through into good clinical practice because, you know, we didn't think it was our role at the time. So the stakes are high. I don't feel like this is panic mongering. I don't feel like this is, this is in poor taste. This living through Mount Sinai in New York City in the midst of a pandemic really solidified for me how important it is to be constantly advocating for uptake of new and novel ways of doing things, because you never know when something like this is going to occur. So as we moved into a version 2.0 of our Abilities Research Center, we really started to think about things in different phases. So we wanted to think about technologies coming to us in different phases of readiness. So phase one would be a technology that, you know, it does need a clinical trial to prove proof of concept. It does need to be able to do certain things that will allow us to validate the tech. Phase two is us getting off our backsides and actually adopting technology that has potential. So rather than seeing a high potential technology and saying, this is great, but you should probably fund a clinical trial with us before we actually adopt it. Actually saying, you know what, no, the evidence supports what you're doing. You already have the papers, you already have the regulatory approval, or so on and so forth. We're going to start using you in the clinic, and we're going to tell people that we're using you in the clinic. Phase 3 is dissemination to the entire health system. And then phase 4, which we've been working on, slightly slowed by COVID, is dissemination out to a global network. This is going to get into the weeds a little bit, and I apologize for that, but I feel like people rarely speak about this, and it's probably worth just a few minutes of your time to hear about how we did it. In phase 1, we work with these technologies, and we first try and understand what they need. Do they need a highly specific clinical trial, or do they have a cool technology, but they don't yet have a specific idea or a path to a very specific clinical trial, but they need help from experts in how to engage in this level of exploration? And so we offer them different paths based on what they do, what they need. And so, phase 1 is pretty simple. If you phase 1A, let's call it, you've got a really cool idea. You already know what what you want to do. It's a clinical trial. Great. We structure a clinical trial agreement with them, just like you would do with a pharma company, just like you would do with, any other company looking to run a clinical trial. Budget the trial, align on the protocol, finish up the contracting, get IRB approval, and then just run and do this thing pragmatically and quickly. I think through all of these steps that I just mentioned, it is worth mentioning that you need to batter your grants and contracts office to make sure that they move in a timely fashion. Otherwise, they will slow things up for months. So that's one direction you can go in. The other direction, this is quite novel. We built sort of legal infrastructure for this out of Mount Sinai, and more on that in a moment. But I was being approached by a lot of companies that needed research but didn't know what research they needed. This was a lot of companies needed this. And so this isn't your typical clinical trial agreement. This is, hey, can we just drop the equipment off at your lab? Can members of your staff start playing with the tech? Can you start seeing what works, seeing what doesn't, and then we can start talking about a clinical trial. So we structured what's called a research services agreement around this. And I'd be happy to, for anyone who reaches out, to share a template of the sort of legalese around this, because I think it's quite interesting and novel. And it allows a company to actually, at relatively low cost, a couple $1,000s a month on average, interact with our staff who are really highly experienced with different technologies and begin exploration and piloting. I put it in here plus or minus IRB because I think that that's an important piece as well. A lot of the work we do in the early phases of this, we don't intend to publish. And so depending on the technology and depending on the use case and depending on what we're doing, you don't need, it's a myth that you need IRB approval to start playing with a new technology. Again, I'll say lots of caveats there, a lot of depending ons there. But if you understand, again, this goes back to being multilingual, if you understand ethics and ethics infrastructure around what an institutional review board is there to do, and I don't mean wildly inappropriately piloting stuff on patients. That's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about having the technology in your hands, collecting data from one another in the lab, healthy people who understand the technology and operating safely with no intention to publish, only pure intention to explore, play, break, and understand what the technology can do. But these are two very different but very needed ways of interacting with health technology startups. And so I wanted to sort of throw it out there. I know this is boring and administrative, but I felt like no one ever shows this, and this is some of what we do. The other takeaway I'll throw out here is never, ever, ever accept an automatic no on these things from your admin or legal. Admin and legal in your department, they're there to support you. So nothing infuriates me more than reporting to them and saying, this is what we want to do, and them just saying no. And let me tell you, my track record is 100% from an automatic no to an eventual yes. Automatic no is never no. So you should never accept it. You should ask why. Why is it no? And then what they will do is they'll tell you a highly compliance-oriented reason why that your request is being declined. And then you say, okay, well, what if we did it this way? And 9 times out of 10, the first time I propose an alternative, they say, oh yeah, that would work. That's no worries. But as you present it to them initially, it's always, don't be disheartened. It's always an automatic no. Don't accept the automatic no. Let them work for their indirect costs is my advice on this point. So moving along to phase 2, adopting technology that we think is promising. There is nothing complicated about this. We created a clinic. So we weren't getting buy-in from existing outpatient and inpatient clinics. We built our own clinic. We built our own clinic that allowed us to get patients working with technologies that we think should be already commonly used that are not being commonly used. Things like the exo, things like virtual reality, things like gamified neurorehabilitation. Nothing more complicated, than providing a clinical service to a set of patients with, who are hungry for new technology. I think that the one thing that I've learned from our phase 2 is that we really are conducting another sort of research, which is once a company doesn't need clinical validation of their concept anymore, what they really do need is validation that their technology simply works, that their technology, that they're providing a level of value to a patient population that the patients are willing to work with. We've worked with technologies, for instance, that really work. They authentically work in clinical trial, but a patient needs to spend 4 hours a day over eight weeks with the technology to get appreciable gains, and they're not willing to do that. And so a company knowing that versus having a successful clinical trial, those are 2 very different things. These are the things that we learn in phase 2. We learn that the technology is glitchy and it pisses off the clinicians, and the clinicians don't want to interact with it. We learn that the price point is simply too high to justify the change in function that you get. We learn all of these little things that you can only learn if you're running a clinic and trying to provide the service day in, day out, as opposed to running a highly protocolized clinical trial. So creating this little clinic environment within the Abilities Research Center ended up providing us with incredibly valuable information about technologies. But our guiding principle here is that we never let a patient be told there's nothing else we can do. Patients that get referred to the Abilities Research Center, there's something else on the horizon that we're going to try. That's our guiding light. That's our North Star for patients and technologies in phase 2. What else can we throw at this patient who has been through everything and is not getting a result? What can we do to just keep pushing the envelope? And that's really how we think about our mission when we're thinking about the ARC Clinic. The other really interesting thing that happened with the ARC Clinic, after not getting a lot of buy-in from clinicians, inpatient, outpatient, when we started doing it, so when we were going to them and saying, hey, you should try out this technology. No, I don't have time. No, I'm not interested. No, it seems complicated. Lots of no's. As soon as we started doing it, clinicians started knocking on our door and saying, hey, what are you doing here? This looks cool. Can we be a part of it? Can we get involved in it? Can you train us on this technology? Creating that little bit, that little edge of scarcity, competition, interest seemed really powerful in activating the entire clinical infrastructure at large, which was really valuable because phase 3, once we've got a technology that makes a lot of sense, the next step is disseminating it through the entire Mount Sinai health system. On this front, for us at this point, we're really just cheerleaders for the technology. We're not trying to do anything other than we believe in this. This helps patients. Patients love it. This should be a thing that we use. So on this front, the only advice I would say is, first of all, encourage your hospital to bill unusual codes. So what I've learned as I've dug into why are we not integrating new technologies into mainstream, often there are a lot of billing codes that would actually cover the adoption of the technology, but the hospitals never billed them before, and they don't really want to because they're afraid that if we use it improperly, we might get investigated, there'll be a headache. No, that's not a good enough reason. Try it out. If it bounces back, it bounces back. You're not going to get horribly investigated if you document well what you're doing and you document your justification for dropping the codes and you try it out. If it bounces back, no worries. If it works, great. We have been having a lot of success with remote physiologic monitoring billing codes, which are listed here. Keep an eye out for remote therapeutic monitoring billing codes that are coming out in 2022, because these are going to cover, I think, a lot of the pragmatic costs associated with using novel technologies to monitor patients during therapy remotely. We just feel that advocacy should always be free. We don't charge companies for these things. We feel like, a rising tide lifts all boats. So we're constantly going to CMS and lobbying for new billing codes that support more and more technology and technological costs specifically, because that's where I feel the big gap is right now is it's all well and good that the clinician time is covered, but a lot of the technology cost is not covered. So you still have hospitals and hospital departments having to go out of pocket if they want to adopt a novel technology. And that's not the way it should be. So we do a lot of advocacy on this front to try and make things change. Phase 4, dissemination to our global network. We're always looking for more partners outside of the country to be able to say, hey, everyone should be doing this. We've got some really wonderful collaborators in Australia, in the UK, in Spain, in Italy. And we're always just trying to find, in Mexico, we're always trying to find more and more collaborators who want to work with us to adopt the technologies so that, again, we're adding value to companies that are doing world-changing, patient life-changing things. We can start referring them to people who think the same way as us. And that's, invariably very, very valuable for companies that are living or dying by how many units they sell. Key takeaways: this is a passion. You need to make space for it in your career, because no one actually gives you the position and tells you that it's your job to tie all of these bows together. So I really mean this. If you want to cross paradigms in the work that you do, you really need to go the extra mile yourself, because to my knowledge, I hope one day these positions will be funded, but to my knowledge, no one is funding a position of someone to be a connector between research and clinical practice and all of these other nodes. Doing something is better than doing nothing, always. So don't be overwhelmed. Don't take away from this meeting that you need to create an abilities research center of your own. Just start something, and prove that it works, and show to your organization that this small thing actually made good sense for the hospital to adopt. And then they will let you do more. And then they'll let you do more, and you build up from there. So doing something is always the goal. Be mission-oriented, not compliance-oriented. My God, yes. Don't worry about compliance. Worry about the patient in front of you and how you're going to help them. It's as simple as that. Be multilingual. Really take the time to understand what is legalese, what is, how do we create contracts? How do clinicians think? How do researchers think? A lot of what I've been doing, a lot of the way that it works is because I've been so fortunate to unwittingly have a highly diverse training and career path, from clinician to computational scientist to experimentalist to clinical researcher. There were all skill sets that were being collected that I didn't even really know consciously were being collected until, I realized the gap I was interested in filling. So making sure that you understand all these moving parts is important. Never accept the automatic no. That one's pretty self-evident. But, as I said, ask why. Why is it no? That is the easiest way to then actively problem solve with your administrative staff rather than being told no and just sort of slinking away. I really also, this slide is so important to me to share because there are so many things that can take you down, that can lower your energy levels for trying to engage in this level of change. And I've said a lot of really probably controversial and annoying things during this talk. And I need to acknowledge that at least some of those things that I've been able to do or say or offend come from my privilege. So I say this almost as a caution because I don't know that, everybody gets to do what I do and everybody can follow the same path as me because of my privilege. So I just, I don't want to say too much about it other than that, but I think it's incredibly important to acknowledge that a lot of what I can do is because I have a lot of privileges, and we should just be aware of it, and people should say it more often. So with that, I want to thank everyone for listening to me ramble on for a while. These are my acknowledgements. Everyone, everything that I've presented here did not happen in a vacuum. Leadership was important. My team is absolutely incredible and kick-ass, and also our patients, and also everyone who volunteers and helps with us in our mission. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen if I can work out how to do that. There we go. And hopefully we've got 10 minutes or so for questions.
So much for such an informative presentation. I really appreciated the way you presented the information in relation to phase-by-phase information. I think it was very relatable. We have a few questions. First of all, I wanted to say there were several requests for the research services agreement template. If you would share, that would be really amazing. One question I have from John Morris is that how do you sort through the numerous companies who may approach you to try their solution? Do you ever turn folks away? How do you make that decision or otherwise prioritize opportunities?
Yep, great question. So on our end, we definitely have more people coming in than we can handle in terms of people who want clinical trials done yesterday. There's a few basic guidelines that we follow. The first is, and this sounds funny, but it really is the truth. The technology has to be cool. We have to be excited by it. So we still are a academic research center, and so I'm not always so interested in testing another telerehab system that is a variation on a theme of the 1,000 other telerehab systems out there. There needs to be something that piques our interest. We need to see something that is like, okay, this is novel. If we did do a clinical trial with you, we would see, we would be able to test X, Y, Z, and it would authentically add to the knowledge of the field. And we're genuinely excited by the technology. We see potential for disruption. We see potential for changing the way that we do things day to day. So that's the first thing that we really want to pass muster on. The second is our ability to deliver. So there are certain technologies, in the MS space, for instance, where I know that working with certain clinicians in our MS clinic, they're not interested in XYZ technologies. And so if I present them with a, hey, we've got a funded clinical trial, they're not going to do the clinical trial. They're not going to recruit patients for us because they're just categorically not interested in the technology, rightly or wrongly. I don't mean to judge anyone in what they're interested in, but if I don't think we can deliver, we will turn a company away. Well, what I'll do is I'll refer them down the street to clinicians that I know are doing a good job in other institutions. Because again, our mission is about propping these companies up and making sure that they survive long enough to help patients. And a really good way to kill a company is to take their money for a clinical trial and then just sit there and not recruit any patients. So if we don't think we can deliver, we will pass them down the street. And then from there, just general good vibes between our team and the company's team. So we really, similar to the way a lot of venture capitalists work, we pick our companies based on the team. If we think that they have good intentions, if we think that they, we like to think of ourselves as putting our name on the work that the company is doing. And so if we're, getting behind a company, we want to be assured that they're good people, that they have a good mission in mind, and that they're aligned with us. So those are kind of the three things that, they're a little bit subjective, I won't lie, but it's how we pick.
Sorry. Thank you. And there was another similar question about how you select the global network and how you select partners for that. And I'm assuming what you just said also resonates in that aspect as well.
Exactly. Yeah.
Amber Walter, says, thank you, David. It's always a pleasure listening from you. I agree. She says, I think I know the answer based on the other comments, but have you assisted Mount Sinai Health System in developing a structure that would improve adoption in the health system?
Yeah, so this is 100% what we are working on, Dr. Herrera and myself within the rehab department. What we are doing on this front is we're working with Mount Sinai Innovation Partners, which is our tech transfer office, to create, SOPs for scaling to other departments. But yes, what we're trying to do right now is just making it more simple for clinicians to adopt the technologies that we're seeing, good results on. And to be perfectly blunt, the simplest way to do that is always through cost efficacy. So, a big part of our innovation is toward the end of phase 2, finding all the ways that we can bill for using existing billing codes for technology in a way that makes the service that you're providing revenue forward. So that is always the final stage of our phase 2 within our small clinic, which is, okay, so if the large outpatient clinics need to use this, how is it going to make them money? How is it going to be not like a giant financial hit initially to invest in the technology, et cetera, et cetera. So setting up those sorts of relationships, setting up those sorts of pipelines is really the process that we follow.
Thank you. And we are at time. So I apologize, we don't have more time for questions, but I really appreciate this presentation. Thank you so much, Dr. Putrino, for sharing your expertise. I really want to thank everyone for attending today's Tech Talk. I look forward to seeing you at our annual conference at ACRM. Our next Tech Talk will be in January of 2022, so stay tuned for more information on that. The recording of this presentation will be available in the next 48 hours. Please recommend this Tech Talk series to your colleagues. Yeah, I really appreciate you being here. Thank you, Dr. Putrino. Again, this was really amazing.
Thanks for having me. Bye, everyone. Thank you for listening.